There comes a moment in every person's life when they realize that being endlessly agreeable does not make them respected. You can be kind and still be underestimated. You can be generous and still be taken for granted. You can remain silent for the sake of peace, while someone slowly learns that your boundaries have no consequences. And this is where a deeper psychological truth begins to reveal itself. People often treat you according to what you repeatedly permit. If you constantly tolerate disrespect, explain away betrayal, accept humiliation, and remain silent whenever your dignity is challenged, you may eventually teach others that crossing your boundaries is safe. But the answer is not to become cruel. It is not to intimidate everyone around you. It is not to make people fear your anger. The deeper goal is to become a person whose self-respect is so clear that disrespect no longer finds an easy place to live around you. Because true power is rarely loud. It does not need threats. It does not need constant aggression. It is felt in the way you carry yourself, the standards you maintain, the boundaries you enforce, and the things you are willing to walk away from. When you no longer depend on someone's approval, you become much harder to manipulate. When you can say no without guilt, people begin to understand that your kindness has limits. And when your words are consistently supported by your actions, people learn that your boundaries are not suggestions. They are decisions. There is a certain kind of disrespect that does not arrive loudly. It does not always come as an insult. Sometimes it arrives as a small interruption. A promise broken without apology. A boundary ignored because someone assumes you will forgive it. A joke made at your expense, followed by, "I was only kidding." A person who repeatedly takes your kindness and interprets it as weakness. A person who learns that you will complain, but you will not leave. And this is where something important begins to happen within you. Every time you tolerate something that violates your dignity, you are not only communicating with another person, you are communicating with yourself. You are teaching your own mind what you believe you deserve. If you repeatedly accept disrespect, eventually your mind may begin to normalize it. What once disturbed you becomes familiar. What once shocked you becomes ordinary. What once seemed unacceptable becomes something you explain away. You tell yourself that the person was having a bad day. You tell yourself that they did not mean it. You tell yourself that you should be understanding. You tell yourself that confrontation will create unnecessary conflict. You tell yourself that maintaining peace is more important. And sometimes understanding is appropriate. Sometimes people genuinely make mistakes. Sometimes patience is wisdom. But there is a difference between understanding someone's mistake and, repeatedly, volunteering yourself as the place where they are allowed to make it. That distinction requires consciousness, because kindness without boundaries can become self-abandonment. Patience without limits can become permission. Forgiveness without change can become repetition. And silence, when used to avoid every uncomfortable truth, can slowly become a form of agreement. This does not mean you should become suspicious of everyone. It does not mean you should interpret every disagreement as disrespect. It does not mean you should become aggressive, cold, or obsessed with proving your strength. The strongest person in the room is not necessarily the loudest. Sometimes it is the person who remains calm because they have nothing to prove. They know who they are. They know what they tolerate. They know what they will not tolerate. And because they know this, they do not need to constantly announce it. Their boundaries are visible through their behavior. This is one of the most important principles of personal power. A boundary that has no consequence is often experienced as a preference. You can say, "Vorse, do not speak to me that way." But if the person continues and nothing changes, your words lose their meaning. You can say, "I will not accept this behavior." But if you repeatedly return to the same situation without changing anything, your actions communicate something different. People pay attention to patterns. They may not remember every sentence you said, but they remember what happened after they crossed the line. They learn what you tolerate. They learn what you overlook. They learn whether your words are connected to action. And this is why respect cannot be demanded through words alone. It is established through consistency. You do not need to threaten someone. You do not need to shout. You do not need to demonstrate anger. You need to become consistent enough that people understand there is a difference between your kindness and your availability for mistreatment. Kindness says, "I wish you well." A boundary says, "But you do not have unlimited access to me." That distinction changes relationships. Imagine someone repeatedly cancels plans at the last moment. The first time, perhaps you understand. The second time, you notice. The third time, you begin to recognize a pattern. The immature response may be to explode. The passive response may be to keep accepting it while secretly becoming resentful. The mature response is different. You observe the behavior. You communicate clearly. Then you adjust your participation. You stop organizing your life around someone who does not respect your time. No dramatic speech is necessary. No revenge is required. You simply stop offering unlimited access to something they repeatedly demonstrate they do not value. This is what makes boundaries powerful. They are not primarily about controlling another person. They are about controlling your own participation. You cannot force someone to respect you, but you can decide what you will do when they do not. That is where your power exists. You cannot control another person's character. You can control their access to your attention. You cannot control whether someone speaks badly about you. You can control whether you spend your life trying to convince them otherwise. You cannot control whether someone appreciates your kindness. You can control whether you continue giving it to someone who consistently abuses it. You cannot control whether someone chooses to leave. You can control whether you abandon yourself trying to make them stay. This is why self-respect is deeper than confidence. Confidence says, "I believe I can handle this." Self-respect says, "I will not participate in what destroys my dignity." Confidence can rise and fall. Self-respect can become a principle. And principles are powerful because they reduce the amount of negotiation you have with yourself. If honesty matters to you, you do not need to debate whether lying is acceptable every morning. If dignity matters to you, you do not need to negotiate every time someone crosses a boundary. If peace matters to you, you do not need to participate in every conflict. You know what you stand for. The clearer you become about your values, the harder it becomes for other people to manipulate you. Manipulation often succeeds through confusion. Someone pushes a boundary, you become uncomfortable. They tell you that you are overreacting. You question yourself. They shift the conversation. Suddenly, you are defending your reaction instead of discussing their behavior. This is why emotional awareness matters. You must learn to recognize when guilt is being used to make you abandon a reasonable boundary. You must learn the difference between being selfish and protecting yourself. You must learn that saying no does not automatically make you cruel. You must learn that disappointing someone is not the same as harming them. This can be difficult for people who have spent years seeking approval. If you are accustomed to being liked, boundaries may initially feel like rejection. You may feel guilty when you say no. You may feel anxious when someone becomes upset with you. You may feel the urge to explain yourself repeatedly. You may want to make sure everyone understands your intentions. But consider this carefully. If someone only respects you when you are doing exactly what they want, is that respect? Or is it simply compliance? There is a difference between being respected and being useful. Some people appreciate you because you make their life easier. When you stop making everything easy for them, their attitude changes. This can reveal something important. You may discover that certain relationships were built less on mutual respect and more on your willingness to accommodate. That discovery can hurt. But it can also free you, because once you see the pattern, you can stop participating in it. You do not need to hate anyone. You do not need to expose anyone. You do not need revenge. You simply need clarity. And clarity often creates distance from what once confused you. One of the greatest mistakes people make is waiting for disrespect to become extreme before taking it seriously. They think, it is not that bad. But disrespect often grows through small permissions. One interruption becomes normal. One insult becomes a joke. One broken promise becomes expected. One violation becomes routine. One manipulation becomes a pattern. And because each individual event seems small, the entire structure develops quietly. This is why you must pay attention to patterns rather than isolated incidents. Anyone can make a mistake. The question is what happens after you communicate it. A person who values you may listen. They may apologize. They may change. They may make an effort. A person who does not care may minimize. They may blame you. They may mock your boundary. They may tell you that you are too sensitive. They may repeat the behavior. The response to your boundary tells you something about the relationship. A healthy relationship can survive boundaries. An unhealthy relationship often depends upon their absence. This is why saying no can become an act of self-discovery. When you finally say no, you may discover who respects you. When you stop over-explaining, you may discover who was only interested in controlling the conversation. When you stop chasing, you may discover who was genuinely interested in walking beside you. When you stop accepting disrespect, you may discover which relationships depended on your silence. This can be painful, but pain is not always evidence that you made the wrong choice. Sometimes pain is the feeling of an old pattern breaking. You may feel lonely after establishing boundaries. You may wonder whether you were too harsh. You may miss people who were not good for you. You may remember the good moments and forget why you needed distance. This is where discipline becomes important. Do not confuse missing someone with needing them back. Do not confuse guilt with responsibility. Do not confuse loneliness with evidence that you should accept anything. Sometimes you miss the familiarity, not the relationship itself. The mind often prefers the known over the unknown. Even an unhealthy situation can feel safe simply because it is familiar. But familiarity is not the same as health. A cage can become familiar too. The fact that you know how to survive somewhere does not mean you are meant to remain there. And this applies not only to relationships, it applies to work, friendships, family dynamics, social environments, online spaces, even your relationship with yourself. You may disrespect yourself by constantly breaking promises to yourself. You may say you will stop a habit, then return to it without reflection. You may tell yourself you will pursue something meaningful, then repeatedly sacrifice it for temporary comfort. You may criticize yourself in ways you would never speak to another person. Self-respect begins internally. If you want other people to understand that you have standards, you must first believe that your own standards matter. This does not mean becoming obsessed with yourself. It means recognizing your own humanity. You deserve rest. You deserve honesty. You deserve dignity. You deserve relationships where respect moves in both directions. You deserve the opportunity to grow without constantly being humiliated. And when you believe this, your behavior begins to change. You stop begging for basic consideration. You stop chasing people who repeatedly withdraw. You stop trying to convince someone of your worth. You stop explaining your boundaries to someone determined to violate them. You stop confusing attention with affection. You stop confusing intensity with connection. You stop confusing fear with respect. Because there is another important distinction. You do not actually want people to fear you. Fear can create temporary compliance. Respect creates lasting boundaries. If people obey you only because they are afraid of your anger, they are not necessarily respecting you. They may simply be calculating the consequences. The deeper goal is to become someone whose presence communicates self-respect. You remain calm. You speak clearly. You do not insult. You do not threaten. You do not need to dominate. But when a line is crossed, you respond. That response may be as simple as ending the conversation, leaving the environment, reducing access, refusing the request, changing the relationship, or simply saying, "I will not continue this conversation while I am being spoken to this way." Then you stop. No 10-minute explanation, no emotional performance, no attempt to win. Your calmness becomes part of the message. This is difficult because many people believe that strength must look aggressive. But aggression is often a reaction. Strength can be restraint. Strength can be knowing that you could respond emotionally and choosing not to. Strength can be walking away when your ego wants to prove a point. Strength can be allowing someone to misunderstand you without chasing them for approval. Strength can be accepting that not everyone will like your boundaries. You do not need universal approval. You need internal alignment. If every person must approve of your decisions before you feel comfortable making them, you have given away your authority. Someone will always disagree. Someone will always misunderstand. Someone will always think you are too much. Someone will always think you are not enough. Someone will always prefer the version of you that was easier to control. You cannot build your life around preventing their disappointment. At some point, you must choose their approval or your integrity, their comfort or your boundary, their expectations or your values. And choosing yourself does not mean choosing against everyone else. It means refusing to choose against yourself simply to keep someone else comfortable. This is where self-respect becomes visible, not in what you demand from others, in what you refuse to betray within yourself. If you know something is wrong for you, you do not need 10 people to confirm it. If you know a situation repeatedly destroys your peace, you do not need another 100 examples. If someone repeatedly demonstrates that they do not respect your boundary, you do not need to keep giving them opportunities to prove it. You can observe, you can decide, you can act, and then you can continue living, because the ultimate goal is not to spend your life watching everyone for signs of disrespect. That would be another form of imprisonment. The goal is to become so grounded in your own standards that you do not need to monitor everyone constantly. You trust yourself to respond if something happens. You know that you can leave. You know that you can say no. You know that you can survive someone's disappointment. You know that you can survive rejection. You know that you can survive being misunderstood. You know that you can rebuild. And when you know you can walk away, you stop begging people to treat you well. You stop trying to earn basic respect. You stop accepting crumbs because you are afraid there will be nothing else. You begin understanding that your dignity is not something another person gives you. It is something you practice through your choices. Every boundary you maintain strengthens it. Every promise you keep strengthens it. Every time you refuse to abandon yourself for approval, it strengthens it. Every time you choose calmness over impulsive anger, it strengthens it. Every time you walk away from what repeatedly devalues you, it strengthens it. And eventually, something changes inside you. You no longer need to announce that you deserve respect. You simply begin living as though you believe it. Self-respect begins with a decision that many people postpone for years. The decision to stop abandoning yourself in order to be accepted by others. You can spend your entire life trying to become someone that other people will approve of. You can become agreeable. You can become available. You can become endlessly patient. You can become the person everyone calls when they need something. You can become the person who never says no. And from the outside, this may look like kindness, but there is a question you must eventually ask yourself. What happens to you while you are busy becoming acceptable to everyone else? Because there is a difference between being kind and being afraid of disappointing people. There is a difference between generosity and self-neglect. There is a difference between humility and allowing others to make you feel small. There is a difference between peace and avoiding every conflict because you are terrified of losing someone's approval. Self-respect begins when you learn to recognize those differences. It is the quiet understanding that your worth does not increase when someone praises you, and it does not decrease when someone rejects you. Your value cannot be placed entirely in another person's hands. If someone compliments you today, you are not suddenly more valuable. If someone insults you tomorrow, you are not suddenly less valuable. Their opinion may contain information. It may even contain truth, but it does not have the authority to define your entire existence. This is where inner strength begins. You stop allowing every external voice to become an internal command. You listen, you evaluate, you decide. That decision-making ability is part of self-respect. Because a person without self-respect often gives other people too much authority over their emotional state. Someone ignores them, and their entire day collapses. Someone criticizes them, and they immediately question themselves. Someone withdraws affection, and they begin begging for reassurance. Someone disagrees with them, and they feel personally attacked. Someone succeeds, and they feel like a failure. Their emotional world becomes dependent upon external events. But self-respect creates an internal center. It does not make you emotionless. You will still feel hurt. You will still feel disappointment. You will still care. You will still experience rejection. But you stop turning every emotional experience into a verdict about your worth. You can say, "That hurt me," without saying, "I am worthless." You can say, "They rejected me," without saying, "Nobody will ever choose me." You can say, "I made a mistake," without saying, "I am a failure." You can say, "They do not respect me," without saying, "I must become someone else to earn their respect." This separation is powerful. It allows you to experience life without becoming completely defined by it. Self-respect also changes the way you speak to yourself. Consider how easily people say things to themselves that they would never say to someone they love. "You are pathetic. You always ruin everything. You are not good enough. You will never succeed. You are too weak. You should have known better." Imagine speaking this way to a child who is trying to learn something difficult. You would understand that mistakes are part of development. You would encourage them to try again. You would correct them without destroying them. Yet many adults become their own harshest enemy. They believe that cruelty will motivate them. Sometimes it does for a short period. Fear can produce action. Shame can create temporary discipline. But eventually, constant self-attack creates exhaustion. You cannot build a strong identity by constantly teaching yourself that you are defective. Self-respect requires correction without destruction. You can acknowledge your weaknesses without turning them into your identity. You can say, "I need to become more disciplined." You do not need to say, "I am worthless because I am not disciplined yet." You can admit that you made a poor decision. You do not need to turn one decision into a permanent definition of who you are. This is not an excuse to avoid accountability. In fact, genuine self-respect requires accountability. If you constantly listen for, you cannot deeply trust yourself. If you repeatedly break promises to yourself, your confidence begins to weaken. If you say you will do something and repeatedly abandon it, your mind notices. This is why self-respect is built through behavior. You cannot simply think your way into it. You must create evidence. Every time you keep a promise to yourself, you create evidence. Every time you choose discipline over impulse, you create evidence. Every time you tell the truth, when lying would be easier, you create evidence. Every time you walk away from something that violates your values, you create evidence. Every time you do what you said you would do, especially when nobody is watching, your mind begins learning something important. I can trust myself. That sentence is more powerful than many motivational statements. Because when you trust yourself, you become less desperate for external validation. You no longer need someone else to constantly reassure you that you are capable. You know because you have experienced yourself following through. You know because you have survived difficult situations. You know because you have made mistakes and recovered. You know because you have faced moments that once terrified you. Confidence can come from success. Self-respect can come from integrity. And integrity means your actions increasingly match your values. If you say, honesty matters, practice honesty. If you say your time matters, protect it. If you say your health matters, treat it with care. If you say your future matters, make decisions that respect that future. If you say your peace matters, stop repeatedly choosing environments that destroy it. The more aligned your behavior becomes with your values, the stronger your relationship with yourself becomes. This is why self-respect is not arrogance. Arrogance says, I am better than you. Self-respect says, I do not need to be better than you to know my worth. Arrogance needs comparison. Self-respect does not. Arrogance needs superiority. Self-respect needs integrity. Arrogance tries to dominate. Self-respect knows when to walk away. A person with self-respect can admire another person's success without feeling personally threatened by it. They can say, you are good at this, without hearing, therefore I am inferior. They can learn from someone without becoming ashamed of what they do not know. They can accept criticism without collapsing. They can accept praise without becoming addicted to it. This emotional balance creates a different kind of presence. You become less reactive, less desperate, less easily manipulated. And people notice, not because you are intimidating them, because you are no longer constantly seeking permission. There is a quiet confidence in someone who does not need to convince everyone of their worth. They do not argue about every insult. They do not chase every person who withdraws. They do not explain every decision. They do not turn every disagreement into a battle. They understand that not every opinion deserves a response. This is especially important in a world where everyone has an opinion about everyone else. People can judge your appearance, your choices, your career, your relationships, your ambition, relationics, your personality, your pace, your failures, your successes. If you allow every opinion to enter your mind without examination, you will eventually become confused about who you are. Self-respect requires discernment. You can ask, is this criticism useful? Does this person understand the situation? Is there something I can learn? Or are they simply projecting their own insecurity? Not every criticism deserves rejection. Not every criticism deserves acceptance. You decide. That is maturity. There is another important dimension of self-respect: the ability to say no. For many people, no feels dangerous. They fear being disliked. They fear conflict. They fear abandonment. They fear being called selfish. So they say yes while their entire body is saying no. Yes to favors they do not have time for. Yes to conversations they do not want. Yes to responsibilities they never agreed to. Yes to relationships that repeatedly exhaust them. Yes to behavior they secretly resent. Then resentment begins growing. And resentment is often what happens when boundaries are repeatedly ignored, including by yourself. You said yes when you wanted to say no. You stayed when you wanted to leave. You remained silent when you needed to speak. You accepted what violated your values. Then you became angry at the other person for taking what you continued offering. This does not mean the other person is always innocent. People can absolutely take advantage of you. But self-respect asks a deeper question. What will I do differently now? That question returns your power to you. Maybe you need to communicate more clearly. Maybe you need to reduce your availability. Maybe you need to stop over-explaining. Maybe you need to leave. Maybe you need to establish a consequence. Maybe you need to stop expecting someone to become different. The answer will depend on the situation. But the principle remains. Your boundary is not an attempt to control another person. It is a decision about what you will participate in. And once you understand this, saying no becomes less frightening. You realize that someone else's disappointment is not automatically your responsibility. Someone can be unhappy with your boundary. They can disagree with it. They can misunderstand it. They can even become angry. That does not automatically mean you did something wrong. Sometimes people become angry because your boundary removes an advantage they were receiving. This is why you must become comfortable with being misunderstood. Not everyone will understand your growth. Some people only knew the version of you that had no boundaries. When you begin saying no, they may say you have changed. They are right. You have changed. You are learning to participate in relationships without abandoning yourself. You are learning that love does not require unlimited access. You are learning that loyalty does not mean tolerating everything. You are learning that forgiveness does not require continued exposure to the same behavior. You are learning that kindness does not require self-destruction. And sometimes this learning will cost you relationships. That possibility must be accepted. Because if keeping every relationship requires betraying yourself, then the price is too high. You cannot purchase belonging with your dignity. You cannot purchase love with self-abandonment. You cannot purchase approval with silence. You cannot purchase peace by continuously swallowing your truth. Eventually, the emotional debt becomes too expensive. And perhaps this is why self-respect sometimes feels lonely at first. You stop participating in old patterns. You stop chasing certain people. You stop entertaining certain conversations. You stop explaining yourself endlessly. The noise becomes quieter. At first, quiet can feel like emptiness. But eventually, you may realize that the emptiness was actually space. Space to think. Space to recover. Space to build. Space to understand yourself. Space to decide what kind of relationships you actually want. And in that space, something begins to grow. Trust in yourself. You begin realizing that you can survive rejection. You can survive someone being disappointed. You can survive being misunderstood. You can survive leaving. You can survive starting over. You can survive being alone for a season. That realization is powerful because fear loses some of its control. You no longer remain in every situation simply because you are afraid of what happens if you leave. You know you can rebuild. And when you know you can walk away, you stop begging people to treat you properly. You become selective rather than desperate. You begin looking for reciprocity. Does this person respect my time? Do they listen when I speak? Can we disagree without cruelty? Do their actions match their words? Do they respect my boundaries? Can I be myself around them? Do I feel that I have to perform to keep them? These questions help you recognize the difference between connection and dependency. A healthy relationship does not require you to disappear. It allows two people to exist as individuals. You can love someone without becoming their possession. You can care about someone without sacrificing your entire identity. You can support someone without becoming responsible for their every emotion. You can disagree without becoming enemies. This is what mature connection looks like. And it begins with people who respect themselves enough to maintain an identity outside the relationship. Self-respect also means respecting your own time, your attention, your energy, your future. Time is not merely something you spend. It is your life moving forward. Every hour given to something cannot be recovered. This does not mean every moment must be productive. Rest is valuable. Play is valuable. Concaching is valuable. Silence is valuable. But there is a difference between choosing rest and escaping your responsibilities indefinitely. There is a difference between enjoying yourself and using distraction to avoid your life. Self-respect means being honest about that difference. You may need to ask yourself where your time is going. What are you repeatedly giving your best hours to? Who receives your attention? What receives your energy? Are you investing in things that matter to you? Or are you constantly giving your life away and then wondering why you feel empty? The way you spend your time is one of the clearest expressions of what you value. If you say your dreams matter, but give them only the leftovers of your attention, your behavior is revealing something. If you say your peace matters, but constantly return to chaos, your behavior is revealing something. If you say your future matters, but repeatedly sacrifice it for immediate comfort, your behavior is revealing something. Self-respect asks you to become honest about these contradictions, not cruel, honest. Because honesty gives you something to work with. You can change what you are willing to admit. You cannot change what you continue pretending does not exist. This is why the journey towards self-respect often begins quietly. It begins when you stop lying to yourself. You admit that something hurts. You admit that something is unhealthy. You admit that you have been accepting too little. You admit that you are afraid. You admit that you have been seeking approval. You admit that you have been neglecting your own needs. And instead of using these admissions to attack yourself, you use them as information. You say, "Now I know. Now I know what I tolerate. Now I know what I need. Now I know what I must change. Now I know where my boundaries need to be. Now I know which promises I need to start keeping. Now I know which version of myself I can no longer continue betraying." There is a moment when you realize that explaining yourself has become a habit. Someone crosses a boundary, and instead of simply responding, you begin constructing an entire argument. You explain why you are hurt. You explain why their behavior was inappropriate. You explain your intentions. You explain your past. You explain what you meant. You explain what you need. You explain why you deserve basic respect. And sometimes, you keep explaining until you have exhausted yourself. But there is something you must understand. A boundary does not become valid because someone agrees with it. You do not need another person's permission to decide what you will accept in your own life. This is where many people misunderstand boundaries. They think a boundary is a demand designed to control another person's behavior. But a boundary is fundamentally a decision about your own behavior. It is not, "You must never disrespect me." It is, "If you speak to me disrespectfully, I will end the conversation." It is not, "You are forbidden from criticizing me." It is, "I am willing to hear criticism, but I will not remain in a conversation built around humiliation." It is not, "You have to treat me exactly the way I want." It is, If this relationship repeatedly violates what I consider necessary for mutual respect, I will reconsider my participation in it. The difference may seem small. Psychologically, it is enormous, because the first approach tries to control another person. The second takes responsibility for yourself. And personal power begins where responsibility begins. You cannot control another person's character. You cannot control their maturity. You cannot control their intentions. You cannot control whether they understand you. You cannot control whether they approve of your boundaries. But you can control what you do when your boundaries are crossed. That is where your authority lives. Many people spend years waiting for others to change. They say, if only they would understand. If only they would stop. If only they would respect me. If only they would recognize what they are doing. And while they wait, the same pattern continues. The other person may never change. The uncomfortable truth is that you cannot build your peace around another person's willingness to become different. You can communicate. You can clarify. You can give someone an opportunity to correct their behavior. But after that, your responsibility shifts towards your own choices. You must decide what happens next. This is why boundaries require action. A boundary without action is often only a request. If you tell someone that you will not tolerate a particular behavior, but every time they repeat it, you remain exactly where you were, they may eventually learn that your words carry no consequence. This is not about punishment. It is about consistency. A consequence is not revenge. A consequence is simply what you choose to do to protect yourself. When a boundary is crossed, you leave the conversation, you end the call, you reduce contact, you stop sharing personal information, you decline the invitation, you reconsider the relationship, you step away from the environment. Sometimes the consequence is simply emotional distance. You stop giving someone access to parts of you that they repeatedly misuse. And this can be difficult for people who have been conditioned to over-explain. They believe that if they can just find the perfect words, the other person will finally understand. But not everyone is confused. Some people understand your boundary perfectly. They simply do not like it. That distinction is important. Someone saying, "I don't understand why this is a problem," does not automatically mean you failed to communicate. Sometimes they understand exactly what you are saying and are testing whether you will enforce it. They may push. They may negotiate. They may become emotional. They may accuse you of changing. What it's meaning. They may say you are selfish. They may say you are difficult. They may tell you that nobody else would have a problem with their behavior. And this is where you must remain calm. You do not need to win the argument. You need to remain clear about your decision. The moment you become obsessed with convincing someone, you give them control over the legitimacy of your boundary. You begin waiting for their approval. You begin thinking, if they agree with me, then I am justified. But your boundary does not require a unanimous vote. You are allowed to decide what works for you. You are allowed to say, "This is not acceptable to me." You are allowed to leave without creating a courtroom. You are allowed to change your level of access without writing a detailed explanation. This does not mean becoming careless or unreasonable. Healthy boundaries require self-awareness. You should examine yourself. You should ask whether you are being fair. You should consider whether your expectations are realistic. You should be willing to hear another perspective. You should distinguish between genuine disrespect and simple disagreement. Not every disagreement is an attack. Not every criticism is disrespect. Not every inconvenience is a violation. Not every rejection is betrayal. A person can disagree with you and still respect you. A person can say no to you and still value you. A person can have different preferences without intending to diminish you. This is why emotional maturity matters. If every uncomfortable moment becomes a boundary violation, you are not protecting yourself. You are building a wall around yourself. A boundary protects your dignity. A wall prevents connection. You need to know the difference. A healthy boundary says, I can respect your difference while also respecting my own needs. An unhealthy demand says, you must behave exactly as I want, or you are against me. The first creates maturity, the second creates control. True self-respect does not require controlling everyone around you. It requires controlling your own participation. This is why the calmest response is often the strongest. Imagine someone speaks to you disrespectfully. You could shout, you could insult them, you could threaten them. You could try to humiliate them in return. For a moment, you may feel powerful. But what have you actually demonstrated? That they can control your emotional state. They provoke you, and you become exactly what the situation demanded. A calmer response can be much more powerful. You pause, you look at the behavior. You decide whether the conversation is worth continuing. And perhaps you say, I am willing to discuss this, but not in that manner. Then you stop engaging with the disrespect. There is no performance, no dramatic speech, no desperate attempt to prove that you are strong. Just a clear boundary. This kind of emotional control changes how people experience you. They begin realizing that you are not easily pulled into chaos. You do not need to respond to every provocation. You do not need to defend yourself against every opinion. You do not need to answer every accusation. You become selective. And selectivity is a form of power. Attention is power. Your emotional energy is power. Your time is power. When you give all of these away to every person who provokes you, you become scattered. When you learn to decide what deserves your attention, you become centered. This is why boundaries are not only about other people. They are also about your relationship with your own attention. What deserves your energy? Which conversations are productive? Which arguments are circular? Which people genuinely want understanding? Which people simply want reaction? Which conflicts can be resolved? Which conflicts exist only because someone wants control? These questions help you stop treating every interaction as equally important. Not every battle deserves you. Not every insult requires an answer. Not every misunderstanding requires correction. Not every person deserves access to your inner world. This does not mean becoming cold. It means becoming intentional. You can remain compassionate without becoming available to everyone. You can be generous without being endlessly accessible. You can forgive without reopening every door. You can love someone without allowing them to repeatedly harm you. You can wish someone well from a distance. This is one of the hardest lessons in emotional maturity. Distance is not always hatred. Sometimes distance is wisdom. Sometimes the healthiest thing you can do for a relationship is stop forcing closeness. When two people repeatedly create the same destructive pattern, more communication is not always the answer. Sometimes the answer is space. Space allows emotion to settle. Space allows perspective. Space allows you to see the relationship without constantly being pulled into its emotional atmosphere. And when you create space, you may notice something you could not see before. How much energy you were spending trying to maintain something that was already unhealthy. You may realize how often you were monitoring another person's mood, how often you were choosing your words carefully to avoid their reaction, how often you were apologizing when you had done nothing wrong, how often you were shrinking yourself to keep the relationship stable. This is not peace. This is emotional captivity disguised as harmony. Real peace does not require you to disappear. It allows you to remain yourself. This is why boundaries are closely connected to identity. If you do not know what you value, you will struggle to know where your boundaries belong. You may say yes because you are afraid. You may say no because you are angry. You may withdraw because you are hurt. You may overgive because you want to be needed. You may tolerate disrespect because you fear being alone. But when you understand yourself more deeply, your decisions become clearer. You know what matters. You know what you need. You know what you can offer. You know what you cannot offer. You know what behavior you can work through. You know what behavior repeatedly destroys your well-being. This clarity reduces emotional chaos. You stop making every decision from the intensity of the moment. You begin making decisions from principles. And principles can protect you when emotions are loud. If you value respect, you do not need to wait until you are furious before responding to disrespect. If you value honesty, you do not need to wait until a lie becomes catastrophic before addressing it. If you value peace, you do not need to remain inside every argument simply because someone wants to continue. If you value your future, you do not need to keep sacrificing it to temporary approval. Your values become a compass, and a compass is more useful than an emotional reaction. This is especially important when dealing with people who test boundaries. Some people will test you without even realizing it. Others will do it consciously. They may ask for more than you agreed to. They may interrupt repeatedly. They may pressure you after you have said no. They may make jokes about things you have asked them not to discuss. They may expect immediate responses. They may assume your availability. They may treat your kindness as an obligation. Your response teaches them what your relationship can become. If you consistently bend, the relationship may be built around your flexibility. If you consistently communicate and enforce reasonable limits, the relationship has an opportunity to develop around mutual respect. This is why your first boundary does not need to be dramatic. It can be simple. I cannot do that. I am not comfortable with that. I need some time. I disagree. I will not continue this conversation if you insult me. I am not available. That does not work for me. I have made my decision. These sentences may feel strange if you are used to explaining everything. But there is strength in simplicity. You do not need to provide a 20-minute justification for a reasonable decision. The more you over-explain, the more opportunities you sometimes create for someone to negotiate with you. You say, I cannot come because I have so much work, and then I have this responsibility, and maybe next week, but I feel bad, and I hope you understand. A simple, "I cannot make it," may be enough. You can be polite without being apologetic for existing. You can be respectful without asking permission to have limits. And this is something many people must learn slowly. You are allowed to disappoint people. That does not make you a bad person. Sometimes disappointment is simply the emotional response someone has when reality does not match their expectation. Their expectation is not automatically your responsibility. If someone expects you to always be available, your unavailability may disappoint them. If someone expects you to always agree, your disagreement may disappoint them. If someone expects you to tolerate their behavior, your boundary may disappoint them. But disappointment is not destruction. People can survive hearing no. People can survive your boundaries. People can survive your independence. And you can survive their reaction. This realization can transform your life. Because once you stop fearing every negative reaction, you become much harder to manipulate. You stop confusing someone's anger with proof that you are wrong. You stop confusing someone's withdrawal with proof that you are unworthy. You stop confusing someone's criticism with proof that you have failed. You become capable of standing in your own position without demanding that everyone stand beside you. That does not mean refusing to change. If someone offers useful criticism, you listen. If you made a mistake, you apologize. If your behavior hurts someone, you take responsibility. Self-respect does not make you incapable of admitting fault. It makes you capable of admitting fault without destroying yourself. You can say, "I was wrong." You can say, "I should have handled that differently." You can say, "I understand why that hurt you." And then, you can still maintain your dignity. Humility and self-respect can exist together. In fact, they often strengthen one another. A person who does not need to appear perfect can admit mistakes. A person who trusts themselves does not need to defend every decision. A person who knows their worth can apologize without feeling inferior. This is the paradox. The less you need to prove your strength, the more strength you can actually develop. You do not need to make people fear your anger. You need to make your boundaries predictable. You need to become someone who says what they mean and means what they say. When your words and actions match consistently, people begin to understand you. They know that your kindness is genuine. They know that your patience has limits. They know that your no means no. They know that your silence is not weakness. They know that if something matters to you, you will act accordingly. And over time, this creates a different kind of reputation. Not a reputation built on intimidation, a reputation built on clarity. People know where they stand with you. They know that you will not humiliate them unnecessarily. They know that you will not create chaos for entertainment. But they also know that you will not repeatedly accept what violates your dignity. This is the kind of respect that does not need to be demanded. It emerges naturally from consistency. And perhaps the deepest boundary you can establish is the boundary between who you are and who other people want you to be. There is a difference between having emotions and being controlled by them. You will feel anger. You will feel humiliation. You will feel jealousy. You will feel disappointment. You will feel fear. You will feel the urge to defend yourself when someone disrespects you. These emotions are not signs of weakness. They are part of being human. The problem begins when you allow every emotion to become an instruction. You feel anger, so you attack. You feel rejected, so you beg. You feel disrespected, so you explode. You feel threatened, so you become aggressive. You feel insecure, so you try to control everyone around you. The emotion appears, and immediately you obey it. But there is a space between what you feel and what you do. That space is where your power lives. A person who cannot control their emotional reactions can be controlled by anyone who knows how to provoke them. Someone insults you, and they control you. Someone ignores you, and they control you. Someone challenges your ego, and they control you. Someone questions your abilities, and they control you. They do not need physical power. They only need to discover which emotional button to press. This is why emotional control is not about becoming cold. It is about becoming conscious. You must learn to notice what happens inside you before you allow it to determine what happens outside you. When anger rises, notice it. When insecurity appears, notice it. When jealousy begins speaking, notice it. When your ego demands that you prove yourself, notice it. Do not immediately obey. Observe. There is something psychologically powerful about observing an emotion without immediately acting upon it. The moment you observe it, you create distance. You are no longer completely inside the emotion. You are witnessing it. You can say, "I am angry." That is different from becoming anger itself. You can say, "I feel disrespected." That is different from allowing disrespect to dictate your next action. You can say, "I feel the need to prove myself." That is different from spending the next hour trying to win an argument that does not matter. This distinction may appear simple, but it can change your relationships, your decisions, and your entire sense of personal power. Many people believe that strength means reacting quickly. They believe that if someone insults them, they must respond immediately. If someone challenges them, they must prove themselves. If someone disrespects them, they must show anger. But why? Why should another person's behavior determine the speed and intensity of your reaction? If someone can make you lose control with a few words, they have discovered something about your psychological world. They know where to touch. And if you become aware of that place, you can begin taking your power back. Imagine someone deliberately trying to provoke you. They say something designed to embarrass you. You feel the heat in your body. Your heart beats faster. Your mind begins producing arguments. You imagine what you should say. You want them to understand that they cannot speak to you that way. At that moment, the easiest thing is to react. But there is another possibility. Pause. Breathe. Look at the situation. Ask yourself, what outcome do I actually want? That question can interrupt the automatic reaction. Maybe the appropriate response is to leave. Maybe it is to calmly tell them that their behavior is unacceptable. Maybe it is to ignore the comment. Maybe it is to address it later when emotions have settled. Maybe the person is simply trying to provoke you, and giving them an emotional reaction would reward their behavior. The point is not that one response is always correct. The point is that you choose. Choice is power. Reaction is often surrender. This does not mean you should suppress your emotions. Suppression is not the same as control. If you constantly push anger down, it does not disappear. It's simply because you refuse to acknowledge it. It may emerge somewhere else. It may become resentment. It may become passive aggression. It may become emotional distance. It may become sudden explosions after months of silence. True, emotional strength does not say, "I am not angry." It says, "I am angry, and I am responsible for what I do with that anger." That is a completely different position. You acknowledge the emotion without giving it the steering wheel. This is especially important when you feel disrespected. Disrespect can touch something deep inside a person. It can activate old wounds. Perhaps you were ignored in the past. Perhaps you were underestimated. Perhaps you spent years trying to prove yourself. Perhaps someone made you feel powerless. Then, when someone disrespects you today, the present moment can activate the emotional history of the past. You may believe you are reacting only to what happened 5 minutes ago. But sometimes you are also reacting to everything that the moment represents. This is why some reactions seem much larger than the event itself. A small comment can create a huge emotional response. The conscious mind says, "It was just a comment." But something deeper may be saying, "Not again." This is where self-awareness becomes essential. You must learn to ask yourself, why did this affect me so strongly? What exactly am I afraid of? What am I trying to prove? Why do I need this person to respect me? What would happen if I simply walked away? What part of me feels threatened? These questions move you beneath the surface instead of simply fighting the external person. You begin understanding the internal reaction. And when you understand the reaction, you gain more control over it. This is one of the deeper lessons of psychology. The parts of yourself you refuse to understand can influence you without your permission. Your anger may contain information. Your jealousy may reveal insecurity. Your defensiveness may reveal fear. Your need for approval may reveal an old wound. Your obsession with proving yourself may reveal that somewhere inside, you still doubt your own worth. This does not mean every emotion is correct. An emotion can be real without being accurate. You can genuinely feel threatened when you are not actually in danger. You can genuinely feel rejected when someone simply has a different priority. You can genuinely feel disrespected when someone is merely disagreeing with you. Your feelings deserve attention. They do not always deserve obedience. This distinction can protect you from countless unnecessary conflicts. Consider how many arguments begin because two people react before understanding what they feel. One person speaks, the other interprets it as an attack. They respond defensively. The first person feels attacked. They become more aggressive. The second person becomes even more defensive. Within minutes, both people are fighting a battle that neither intended to start. The original issue disappears. Now the argument is about tone, then respect, then the past, then everything that has ever gone wrong. This is what happens when emotions become leaders instead of information. Emotional control interrupts the chain. Someone says something. You notice your reaction. You pause. You ask what is actually happening. You respond to the situation rather than to the emotional story your mind immediately created. That is maturity. It does not guarantee that every conversation will end peacefully. Some people are unreasonable. Some people are intentionally disrespectful. Some situations genuinely require distance. But even when you decide to confront someone, you can confront them without losing yourself. There is a tremendous difference between controlled strength and uncontrolled aggression. Aggression says, I must hurt you because you hurt me. Strength says, I will protect myself without becoming someone I do not respect. Aggression seeks victory. Strength seeks alignment. Aggression wants the other person to feel what you felt. Strength asks, what response protects your dignity and your future? This is why emotional control can make you more intimidating without making you more aggressive. People may expect anger. Instead, they encounter calmness. They may expect you to argue. Instead, you state your position once. They may expect you to chase them. Instead, you step back. They may expect you to beg for approval. Instead, you continue living according to your values. This creates a psychological shift. You become harder to manipulate because your emotional reactions are no longer predictable tools in someone else's hands. You do not need to make people fear your temper. You need to make your emotional state your own responsibility. If someone knows they can insult you and make you explode, they possess influence over you. If someone knows they can withdraw attention and make you desperate, they possess influence over you. If someone knows they can provoke jealousy and make you compete, they possess influence over you. If someone knows they can criticize you and make you abandon your confidence, they possess influence over you. Emotional independence means reducing that influence. It means learning that you can feel something without immediately becoming something. You can feel rejected and still maintain your dignity. You can feel angry and still speak calmly. You can feel jealous and still choose generosity. You can feel afraid and still act intelligently. You can feel embarrassed and still remain present. You can feel insulted and still decide whether responding serves you. This is not weakness, it is mastery. And mastery is rarely dramatic. It is often quiet. It is the moment when your mind says, react, and you choose to think. It is the moment when your ego says, prove yourself, and you decide that you do not need to. It is the moment when someone tries to pull you into chaos, and you remember that their chaos does not have to become yours. This ability can be trained. You do not become emotionally controlled simply by understanding the concept. You practice it. Start by slowing your reactions. When something triggers you, do not immediately send the message. Do not immediately make the phone call. Do not immediately post. Do not immediately confront. Give your nervous system time to settle. Sometimes 10 minutes can change the quality of a decision. Sometimes an hour can prevent a regret. Sometimes sleeping before responding can reveal that what felt like an emergency was simply an emotional wave. Emotions rise. Emotions peak. Emotions fall. You do not have to make permanent decisions during temporary emotional storms. This is especially important when you are angry. Anger often creates a false sense of urgency. It tells you that you must respond now, you must say something, you must defend yourself, you must make them understand. But anger does not always require immediate action. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do with anger is understand what it is protecting. Perhaps it is protecting your dignity. Perhaps it is protecting a value. Perhaps it is protecting an insecurity. Perhaps it is protecting an old wound. Ask, listen, then decide. If someone crosses a legitimate boundary, your calmness does not mean you ignore it. You can still respond firmly. You can say, that is not acceptable. You can say, if you continue speaking to me like that, I will end this conversation. You can say, I am willing to discuss the issue, but I will not participate in insults. You can say, I have heard what you said, and I disagree. You can say nothing and leave. The power comes from choosing rather than reacting. Another important part of emotional control is refusing to personalize everything. Not every person's behavior is about you. People carry their own fears, their own insecurity, their own disappointments, their own unresolved conflicts. Sometimes people are rude because they are struggling. Sometimes they are rude because they lack maturity. Sometimes they are rude because they want a reaction. Sometimes they are simply having a difficult day. Understanding this does not mean tolerating harmful behavior. It means you do not automatically turn another person's behavior into a statement about your identity. Someone's anger does not necessarily mean you are wrong. Someone's rejection does not necessarily mean you are unworthy. Someone's criticism does not necessarily mean you are incapable. Someone's disrespect does not necessarily mean you are weak. You must evaluate reality instead of accepting every external reaction as a psychological verdict. This is where inner stability develops. You become less dependent on the emotional weather around you. Someone is happy with you. You remain grounded. Someone is angry with you. You remain grounded. Someone praises you. You remain grounded. Someone criticizes you. You remain grounded. Someone leaves. You remain grounded. Someone arrives. You remain grounded. This does not mean you story. It means your identity is no longer constantly rearranged by other people's behavior. That is a powerful form of freedom, and it changes how you communicate. You begin speaking more deliberately. You stop using anger to make your point stronger. You stop raising your voice because you fear that people will not listen. You stop insulting people when you feel powerless. You stop making threats you cannot enforce. You stop sending long emotional messages at midnight. You stop trying to win every disagreement. You begin choosing your words because you understand that words have consequences. Your calmness becomes part of your authority. People listen differently when they realize that your emotional state cannot easily be manipulated. And there is another layer to this. You must learn to control your ego. The ego often wants recognition. It wants to be right. It wants to appear strong. It wants the last word. It wants everyone to know that you cannot be disrespected. But sometimes your need to prove that you are strong is exactly what makes you easy to control. Someone challenges your intelligence. You feel compelled to prove yourself. Someone questions your success. You begin listing your achievements. Someone ignores you. You desperately want their attention. Someone doubts you. You work yourself into exhaustion trying to prove them wrong. But ask yourself, who is actually controlling whom? If another person's opinion can dictate your behavior for days, then their opinion has more power than it deserves. You do not need to prove every person wrong. Sometimes the strongest answer is improvement. Let your life become evidence. Let your discipline become evidence. Let your character become evidence. Let your consistency become evidence. You do not need to win every conversation when your life is moving in the direction you respect. This is why emotional control and self-respect are deeply connected. When you respect yourself, you do not feel obligated to defend yourself against every minor attack. You know that your worth is not hanging from one conversation. You know that one person's opinion cannot erase your experience. You know that walking away from an argument does not mean losing. Sometimes leaving is the clearest expression that you refuse to become the worst version of yourself just because someone invited you to. There is a moment when words stop being enough. You can tell people what you believe. You can tell them what you will tolerate. You can tell them what you expect. You can tell them who you want to become. But eventually, people stop listening to what you say and start watching what you do. This is where your actions become your reputation. You can speak about discipline for years. But if your behavior constantly contradicts your words, people will believe your behavior. You can say that you value respect, but if you repeatedly tolerate disrespect, people will notice the contradiction. You can say that your time matters, but if you are always available, whenever someone demands your attention, your actions communicate something different. You can say that you have boundaries, but if you never enforce them, people will eventually understand that your boundaries are only words. This is not necessarily because people are cruel. Human beings naturally learn through patterns. We observe consistency. We notice what happens repeatedly. We notice whether someone's words have consequences. And this is why one of the strongest forms of communication is not what you say. It is what you consistently do. A person who speaks loudly about strength, but reacts emotionally to every provocation, does not appear strong. A person who quietly maintains their standards can appear far more powerful. They do not need to announce their boundaries because their behavior demonstrates them. They do not need to threaten to leave because they are willing to leave when necessary. They do not need to demand respect because they do not remain where disrespect becomes a pattern. This is the difference between performance and character. Performance asks correct. Performance asks, how do I look? Character asks, what do I consistently do when nobody is watching? That question can reveal more about you than any motivational speech. Because when there is no audience, there is no image to protect. There is only your behavior. And your behavior becomes evidence. Every promise you keep is evidence that you can trust yourself. Every promise you repeatedly break is evidence that your words do not yet have enough weight behind them. Every boundary you enforce is evidence that your standards are real. Every boundary you repeatedly abandon teaches something different. This is why your actions must eventually catch up with your words. If you say you are done with a certain situation but continue returning to it, every time someone gives you a little attention, your actions are speaking. If you say you will not tolerate being treated badly, but repeatedly accept the same behavior without changing your response, your actions are speaking. If you say you want a better life, but continuously choose the same habits that created your current situation, your actions are speaking. And perhaps the most difficult part is that your actions are also speaking to yourself. You are not only teaching other people how to treat you. You are teaching yourself what you are willing to tolerate. Every time you keep a promise to yourself, you strengthen self-trust. Every time you abandon yourself for approval, you weaken it. This is why real confidence cannot be built entirely through positive thinking. You can tell yourself, I am powerful. But if your daily behavior constantly contradicts that belief, your deeper mind will notice. You need evidence. You need experiences that demonstrate your ability to act according to your values. This can begin with small things. If you tell yourself you will wake up at a certain time, get up. If you tell yourself you will complete a task, complete it. If you say you will stop responding to someone who repeatedly disrespects you, follow through. If you decide that you need time alone, take it. If you say no, do not immediately reverse your decision because someone becomes unhappy. These actions may appear insignificant. They are not. They are the foundation of self-respect, because the person you become is built through repeated evidence. You become disciplined by doing disciplined things. You become courageous by doing courageous things. You become trustworthy by behaving in trustworthy ways. You become emotionally strong by practicing emotional control. You become respected by behaving in ways that deserve respect. This is why you should stop waiting to feel like the person you want to become. Act first. Identity often follows behavior. If you want to become confident, begin doing things that require confidence. Speak clearly. Make decisions. Accept that some people will disagree. If you want to become disciplined, stop negotiating with yourself every time something becomes uncomfortable. Do what you said you would do. If you want to become respected, stop participating in situations that repeatedly require you to abandon your dignity. If you want to become independent, stop making every decision based on external approval. Your behavior becomes the bridge between who you are and who you want to become. But there is a subtle danger here. Some people hear the idea of actions speak louder than words and turn it into aggression. They think they must prove themselves. They believe they must demonstrate dominance. They believe they must show everyone that they cannot be challenged. But real strength does not require constant demonstration. If you constantly need to prove that you are powerful, you may still be searching for power outside yourself. A truly grounded person does not need to turn every interaction into a competition. They can walk away. They can remain silent. They can admit when they are wrong. They can apologize. They can change their mind. They can listen. They can allow someone else to have the last word. This is important because sometimes the ego confuses being respected with being dominant. But dominance and respect are not the same thing. Dominance can create fear. Respect creates trust. Dominance says, "You will do what I want." Respect says, "You understand that I have standards, and I understand that you have yours." The strongest relationships are not built on fear. They are built on clarity. And clarity comes from consistency. When your behavior is predictable in the right ways, people know what to expect from you. They know you will be honest. They know you will communicate directly. They know you will not tolerate certain behavior. They know you will not retaliate unnecessarily. They know that if you say something matters, you will act accordingly. This consistency creates credibility, and credibility creates influence. Think about the people you naturally respect. Usually, it is not simply because they speak well. It is because their behavior has given you reasons to trust them. They show up. They keep their word. They remain composed under pressure. They treat people well, even when there is nothing to gain. They do not change their principles, depending on who is watching. They do not need to announce their character. Their character is visible. This is what you should aim for, not an intimidating image, a reliable identity. You want people to know that your words have weight, because your actions consistently support them. If you say you need space, take space. If you say a behavior is unacceptable, respond when it happens. If you say you are committed to something, make decisions that support that commitment. If you say you respect yourself, stop repeatedly putting yourself into environments that destroy your dignity. This does not mean you will never change your mind. You are allowed to change your decisions. But there is a difference between changing your mind because circumstances changed and abandoning your standards because someone pressured you. Self-respect requires you to know the difference. And sometimes your actions must communicate what words cannot. Imagine someone repeatedly speaks over you. You have already asked them to stop. They continue. At some point, another explanation may accomplish nothing. You can simply stop participating in conversations where you are consistently treated that way. Imagine someone repeatedly cancels on you at the last moment. You have communicated your frustration. They continue. You do not need to make the same speech every week. You can stop arranging your schedule around them. Imagine someone repeatedly insults you and then says they were joking. You do not need to prove that their joke was offensive. You can simply decide that you will not remain in that environment. Your action communicates the boundary. This is why walking away can sometimes be more powerful than arguing. An argument requires participation. Leaving removes your participation. You are not trying to punish the other person. You are simply refusing to continue. And there is tremendous freedom in realizing that you do not have to respond to everything. You can let someone have their opinion. You can let someone misunderstand you. You can let someone believe they won an argument. You can let someone think you are too sensitive. You can let someone call you difficult. You do not have to correct every narrative. Your life will eventually reveal what your words cannot. If someone thinks you are incapable, you do not always need to convince them. Build. If someone thinks you are weak, you do not need to become aggressive. Become disciplined. If someone thinks you are not worthy, you do not need to beg. Become rooted in your own values. If someone disrespects you, you do not need to create chaos. Adjust their access to you. This is a different form of power. It is the power of response rather than reaction. And response requires patience. You may need to tolerate being misunderstood temporarily. You may need to resist the urge to explain yourself. You may need to let your actions accumulate over time, because meaningful change is often slow. One calm response does not suddenly make you emotionally mature. One disciplined day does not make you disciplined. One boundary does not create an entirely new identity. But repeated behavior does. This is why consistency is more powerful than intensity. Anyone can become extremely motivated for a week. Anyone can make dramatic promises. Anyone can post about their transformation. The deeper question is what happens after the excitement disappears. Do you continue? Do you maintain the standard? Do you keep the promise? Do you return after failure? Do you continue when nobody is watching? This is where character separates itself from performance. You may not feel motivated. Do it anyway. You may not feel confident. Speak anyway. You may feel uncomfortable. Maintain the boundary anyway. You may feel lonely. Do not return to a harmful situation simply because you are lonely. You may feel tempted to prove yourself. Remember that your life does not need to become a courtroom where everyone must admit you were right. Your actions can be enough. This principle also applies to your relationship with criticism. When someone criticizes you, you do not need to immediately defend yourself. Listen. If there is truth in it, use it. If there is no truth in it, leave it. Your actions over time will tell you more than a single opinion. You do not need to become defensive every time someone questions you. A person who is secure can examine criticism without losing themselves. They can say, "Maybe there is something I need to improve." That sentence does not weaken you. It demonstrates strength. Because self-respect is not the refusal to see your flaws. It is the ability to see them without collapsing. You can be imperfect and still maintain standards. You can make mistakes and still deserve dignity. You can apologize and still have boundaries. You can learn and still have confidence. This balance is essential. Some people use confidence as an excuse never to admit fault. Others use humility as an excuse to constantly diminish themselves. Neither extreme is healthy. The stronger position is grounded honesty. I know what I do well. I know what I need to improve. I can accept correction. I will not accept humiliation. I can apologize. I will not beg for approval. I can listen. I can still make my own decisions. This is what it means to let your actions speak. You are not trying to create an image. You are building congruence. Your internal values and external behavior begin to match. What you believe becomes what you practice. What you practice becomes what you are known for. And what you are known for, eventually, shapes the kind of relationships that remain around you. People who respect consistency will understand you. People who depended on your inconsistency may become uncomfortable. This is natural. When you change your behavior, the people around you may need to adjust. Some will. Some will not. You cannot control which ones. But you can control whether you return to your old behavior simply to make them comfortable. If someone only likes you when you have no boundaries, their discomfort with your boundaries is not necessarily evidence that your boundaries are wrong. Sometimes your growth exposes an old arrangement. You used to give more. You used to tolerate more. You explain more to explain more. Used to chase more. Now, you do not. The relationship must either evolve or reveal its dependence on the old version of you. This can be painful, but it can also be clarifying. Because your actions create information. They show you what people actually respond to. They show you what relationships can survive your growth. They show you where your standards need strengthening. They show you whether you trust yourself. And perhaps the deepest lesson is this: you do not need to convince people to respect you if you consistently respect yourself. Not because everyone will suddenly become kind. Not because nobody will ever disrespect you again. But because you will know what to do when disrespect appears. You will not need to panic. You will not need to beg. You will not need to explode. You will not need to prove your worth. You will simply observe the behavior, remember your standards, and act accordingly. There comes a point in life when you must understand that not everything is meant to be held on to. Some people are afraid of walking away because they confuse leaving with losing. They think that if they leave a relationship, they have failed. If they leave a friendship, they are disloyal. If they leave a situation, they are weak. If they stop chasing someone, they are giving up. But sometimes, walking away is not an act of defeat. Sometimes, it is the clearest evidence that you finally understand your own worth. There are situations where staying requires you to betray yourself. You stay because you are afraid of being alone. You stay because you remember how things used to be. You stay because you hope someone will eventually become the person you need them to be. You stay because you have already invested so much time. You stay because you do not want to admit that something you believed in is no longer healthy. You stay because leaving feels painful. And this is where the mind can become trapped by what psychologists might describe as attachment to the familiar. The familiar can feel safer than the unknown, even when the familiar is slowly destroying your peace. You can become accustomed to disappointment. You can become accustomed to being ignored. You can become accustomed to being criticized. You can become accustomed to apologizing for things you did not do. You can become accustomed to walking on eggshells. You can become accustomed to giving more than you receive. Eventually, the unhealthy environment begins to feel normal. And when something becomes normal, you stop questioning it. You begin asking, how can I make this work? Instead of asking, is this actually good for me? That question can change everything. Because not every problem is meant to be solved by staying. Some problems are solved by leaving. Walking away does not mean that you never cared. It may mean that you cared enough to recognize that continuing in the same pattern was destroying something inside you. You can love someone and still leave. You can forgive someone and still leave. You can understand someone's pain and still leave. What? You can wish someone well and still decide that they no longer have access to you. These truths are difficult because people often believe love requires unlimited tolerance. But love without boundaries can become self-abandonment. Compassion without wisdom can become a reason to remain trapped. Forgiveness without change can become permission for repetition. You must learn that understanding someone does not require you to keep accepting their behavior. You can understand why someone behaves the way they do without agreeing to experience the consequences of their behavior forever. Perhaps they are wounded. Perhaps they are insecure. Perhaps they were never taught how to communicate. Perhaps they carry unresolved pain. Perhaps they are afraid. You can understand all of this and still say, "This is not healthy for me." That sentence is not cruelty. It is clarity. One of the greatest forms of personal power is knowing that you have an exit. When you know you can walk away, you become less desperate to control what happens. You stop begging. You stop chasing. You stop negotiating against yourself. You stop accepting whatever someone offers simply because you are afraid they might offer nothing at all. Fear makes people accept very little. The fear of loneliness can make someone tolerate disrespect. The fear of rejection can make someone abandon their standards. The fear of failure can make someone remain in a situation that has already failed them. The fear of starting over can make someone protect a past that no longer exists. But sometimes the thing you are afraid to lose is already gone. You are simply holding on to the memory of what it once was. You remember the beginning. You remember the good conversations. You remember the laughter. You remember the promises. You remember the version of that person who made you feel valued. And because those memories are real, you keep hoping they will return. But a memory is not a contract. The past cannot guarantee the future. You must judge a situation not only by what it once was, but by what it consistently is. This requires courage, because reality can be painful when it contradicts your hopes. You may have to admit that someone you loved is not capable of giving you the relationship you imagined. You may have to admit that a friendship has become one-sided. You may have to admit that a certain environment is preventing your growth. You may have to admit that you have been staying because you are afraid, not because you are fulfilled. These realizations can hurt, but pain does not always mean you are making the wrong decision. Sometimes pain is the cost of becoming honest. There is a difference between discomfort and danger. Growth can be uncomfortable. Leaving can be uncomfortable. Setting boundaries can be uncomfortable. Starting over can be uncomfortable. But discomfort does not automatically mean that you should return to the old patterns. Sometimes discomfort is simply what freedom feels like before you become accustomed to it. Imagine someone who has spent years depending on another person's approval. They finally stop chasing. At first, silence feels unbearable. They wonder why the person has not contacted them. They check their phone. They replay conversations. They question whether they made the right decision. But slowly, something changes. They begin noticing their own thoughts again. They begin sleeping better. They begin spending time with people who genuinely value them. They begin remembering who they were before the relationship consumed so much attention. They begin discovering that solitude is not the same as abandonment. This is important. Being alone and being abandoned are not identical experiences. You can be alone and still be connected to yourself. You can be surrounded by people and still feel profoundly alone. The quality of your relationship with yourself matters. If you cannot stand being alone, you may become vulnerable to almost any form of company. You may choose someone who hurts you simply because they are there. You may remain in unhealthy relationships because emptiness feels frightening. But solitude can become a place of reconstruction. It gives you time to ask questions that were difficult to hear while you were constantly distracted. What do I actually want? What have I been tolerating? What have I been pretending not to notice? Who am I when I am not trying to impress anyone? What kind of person am I becoming through this relationship? What does my life look like if I stop chasing approval? These questions can lead you back to yourself. Walking away is not always about another person. Sometimes you need to walk away from a version of yourself, the version that constantly seeks validation, the version that says yes when it means no, the version that keeps returning to what hurts because it is familiar, the version that believes suffering proves loyalty, the version that thinks being needed is the same as being loved, the version that believes everyone must understand you before you are allowed to move forward. That version of you may have helped you survive something once. But survival strategies are not always appropriate for the life you are trying to build now. You may have learned to please people because it kept you safe. You may have learned to remain silent because speaking created conflict. You may have learned to anticipate everyone's emotions because you were afraid of their reactions. You may have learned to stay because leaving once felt impossible. But growth means asking whether those strategies still serve you. You are allowed to outgrow the behaviors that once protected you. You are allowed to become someone who no longer needs to chase, someone who no longer begs, someone who no longer explains every decision, someone who no longer mistakes suffering for love, someone who no longer remains simply because leaving would disappoint someone else. This does not mean you should walk away at the first sign of difficulty. Healthy relationships require patience, they require communication, they require compromise. They require forgiveness, they require the willingness to work through uncomfortable moments. Walking away should not become an excuse to avoid accountability or difficult conversations. The goal is not to become someone who leaves whenever things become hard. The goal is to become someone who knows the difference between difficulty and destruction. A difficult relationship can improve when both people are willing to grow. A destructive relationship often becomes a cycle where the same harm repeats despite communication. The difference is not whether problems exist. Every relationship has problems. The difference is whether there is mutual responsibility. Can both people acknowledge what happened? Can both people apologize? Can both people change? Can both people respect boundaries? Can both people communicate without humiliation? Can both people take responsibility without turning every conversation into blame? If the answer is yes, there may be something worth rebuilding. If the answer is repeatedly no, then your willingness to stay may become part of the problem. Because your continued presence can sometimes communicate that the current behavior is acceptable. Again, this is not about punishment. It is about reality. People learn from consequences. If someone repeatedly mistreats you, and you continue giving them exactly the same access to you, they have little reason to believe anything must change. Your withdrawal can communicate what your words could not. Your absence can become a boundary. Your silence can become a decision. Your distance can become protection. But walking away should not be used as a manipulation tactic. Do not leave just to make someone chase you. Do not disappear simply to see whether someone cares. Do not create distance as a test. That keeps you psychologically attached to the same person. You are still waiting for their reaction. True detachment is different. You walk away because you have made a decision, not because you are trying to create a particular response. You do not need them to chase you. You do not need them to regret losing you. You do not need them to finally admit that you were right. You do not need an apology before you begin healing. This is one of the hardest forms of freedom, the freedom to stop waiting for someone else to give you closure. Closure is not always a conversation. Sometimes closure is accepting that you have enough information. You have seen the pattern. You have communicated. You have tried. You have waited. You have watched. Now you decide. And the decision may be painful, but it can still be correct. There is enormous psychological energy wasted on trying to make other people understand why they hurt you. Sometimes they understand. Sometimes they do not. Sometimes they will never understand. If your healing depends on their understanding, you have given them control over your healing. You cannot require someone else to become self-aware before you are allowed to move forward. You can move forward without their agreement. You can forgive without receiving an apology. You can leave without being understood. you can rebuild.